Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on data to support the student recruitment road to recovery in Australia. We will review how COVID-19 rapidly changing the marketing mix in the international education sector insights in the areas we like to call the 4 Ps of student recruitment and the likely trends for post-COVID-19 recovery. My name is Tanveer Shahid. I'm the Deputy Convener of IEAA Marketing and Recruitment Network. On behalf of my network colleagues, Michelle and Emma, the IEAA, and our presenter, Kerry, we would like to welcome you all. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that this webinar is being hosted and recorded on the lands of the Boon Wurrung and Woi Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we are here today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people participating in this forum. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. We do have time scheduled for questions towards the end of today's session. You can ask your questions via the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen at any time, and I will moderate this answering at the end of the session. We will attempt to get through as many questions as possible in the time allotted. There will be a recording of today's webinar available to registered participants. We will make this available along any additional available PowerPoint slides next week. As heads up, during the presentation, our presenter will use Mentimeter for some of the interactive polls. It can be accessed through menti.com with a particular code which will be shared with you during the presentation. As you know, our today's guest speaker is Kerry Ramirez, Managing Director of Studymove. Kerry is an economist with over 17 years experience in international education. He previously worked at Macquarie University within the international office after completing his Master of International Business. Kerry established Studymove in 2007, has completed various consulting projects for numerous Australian universities and international universities in the areas of benchmarking, marketing intelligence, and even online marketing. Kerry loves stats and like to share stories with data. He is a regular presenter at various domestic and international conferences, including AIEC, API, NAFSA, NZIEC, industry workshops, and AUIDF meetings. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Kerry Ramirez, Managing Director of Studymove, for today's webinar. Over to you, Kerry.
Excellent. Thank you, Tanveer, for the introduction. Let me just share my screen. Oh, here you go. Let me just share my screen now. Okay, here we go. Excellent. All right, thank you, Tanveer, so much for the introduction, and thank you to IEAA for the opportunity to be here today and connect with each one of you experts in student recruitment and marketing. My name is Kerry Ramirez. I am the Managing Director of Studymove, and it's great to be able just to be here and share with you a lot of the analysis and the data that we have been collecting this year with the aim of present and taking some time just to analyze how our student marketing and recruitment strategies have been changed during 2020 in order really just to cope with this very difficult and challenging period. I have to say, before I really start with the presentation, on a personal note, one of the things that I really like out of my job is that on a weekly basis, I had the opportunity to talk to many of you, professionals in international education, especially people responsible in marketing and recruitment. And I just have to say that I know how hard has been this year for each one of you. I think that this has been one of the areas in the international education sector that, as we all know, has been hit and affected a lot. But also I have witnessed the hard work that you have been putting, the level of resilience and the professionalism that you actually had in regards to this challenging time. So I just want to say also thank you for all your great work. It has been amazing just to see how under such a difficult and complicated period, we have been able just to keep the sector alive. And especially the level of care that you have all shown in international students, which are such an important and vital part of the things that we do. So thank you so much on a personal note. And today what we're gonna try to do is precisely trying to tackle one of the big problems with COVID-19. And that problem is that things go very quickly with COVID. It was in March when we were just trying to figure out what is this coronavirus. We used to call it coronavirus, and suddenly, bang, in a snap, we're in October. And things have moved very quickly. And I don't think we had the opportunity really just to take a step back and see what has changed and where we at. And the main important aspect of this presentation is that for you just to have 35, 40 minutes where you can actually sit down and see what are the things that we think has changed in the way in which we have been putting our strategies together. In order to do that, the presentation is actually divided in two main areas. First, we're gonna go through the market trends. What is the data is telling us in regards of what's the position of the international education sector, looking at the data that is available. And after that, we're really gonna look into what we call the 4 new P's of student recruitment or marketing. We believe that looking into the 4 P's of marketing is a very good way just to see what's changing, what is not changing, and how we're gonna move forward in our recovery to the 2021. So let me just take you through that, a few slides. It's a lot of data that we have been put together, and I hope you find this information useful. Of course, we're gonna have time just to have a conversation at the end, so we'll have time for some Q&A after the presentation. So thanks again for joining us. Now, starting in looking at the data set, what the data is telling us at this stage. And I think that here in Australia, we're extremely lucky that we have access to a lot of data that it has been collected by the government and make it available. It's data that is timely, is reliable, and is very, very important to look into it. But I think it's important just really to understand the performance of Australia during COVID-19 to see how things are looking sector by sector, because every different sector in the international education industry has been affected in a different way. So let me just take you through the number of international student enrollments, and this is the latest figures that we have available, which is the numbers up to July this year. Starting with the higher education sector, the higher education sector, the July figures show us that we are 5% below in comparison to last year. At the moment, there are 391 student enrollments in the higher education sector. Now, these 5% may not look like a really big drop. Probably you'll be like, oh, well, probably that's not that bad. But this is because their enrollment figures, we need to remember, are actually combined by 2 very important ingredients, and we need to look into that. This figure of 391 international student enrollments is actually put together by a large number of continuing students who started in 2018 and 2019 and progressed to 2020. And we need to remember that 2018 and 2019 were very, very good years for the international education sector. So those great wins that we had in the previous years are actually helping to the overall numbers to be in not such a big position. But the real effect of COVID-19 has been, as you all know, in new commencements on the people who are starting in 2020, which is about, is a yellow bar, which is actually less in comparison to what we had in previous years. Just for you to have a better idea, this is just the number of the yellow bar, the new student commencements. And as you can see, the drop has been quite significant for the higher education sector. We had about up to July, about 110,000 new students, which is going back, if you see on the chart, to the numbers that we had in 2016, which is 4 years ago. And this actually represents a drop of more than 25%, which it has been very, very, very significant. So this is in the new commencements, and obviously it's the students who are unable to start because of travel restrictions and all the mess that COVID-19 has created. That's where we have seen the impact of COVID-19 in the higher education sector. Now, recently, and this is just from yesterday, so I just managed to put this graph together, Stephen Nerlich from the Department of Education shared a blog post on IEAA that is showing us how the number of commencements have been looking month by month. And this is for all sectors, but we know that this number of commencements is really affecting the most in this chart, the higher education sector. And if you see the July numbers, you see that there is a very significant drop that happened in July. In fact, early in the year, when COVID started, it was not such a bad drop. So we also need to consider that COVID is something that has been evolving month by month. And this is one of the challenges that we are facing, that things are changing month by month. And this is where we are at with higher education. Now, if we look at the vet sector experienced a very different kind of year. And in fact, there are currently, the July numbers are showing that there are 250,000 international student enrollments in the vocational education sector. And that represents 30,000 more students at the same time last year. Now, some of you will be like, what? How is that possible? Well, there are a lot of factors that are actually creating a positive growth in the vet sector. But what the data is telling us, and we are very lucky once again that here in Australia, we have the data just to capture that. But we know that a lot of students who were going to start in higher education at the start of the year, when they saw in March that COVID was creating a big uncertainty and big chaos, they actually looked for a plan B, and they actually found in the vet sector an option just to continue their studies here in Australia. So it was a transfer of students moving from higher ed and into vet. Also, there were some students who were on a pathway in the ELICA sector doing English language, who most of the time actually they go to higher education, which once again, probably due to affordability and a more flexible option, they identify as a plan B, as an alternative to remain in Australia into the vet sector. So it was a transfer between sectors that is important just to note. And it's important to note because in 2021, we might see that there is a rebalance of these sectors. Maybe some of the students who temporarily they decide to vet, they will go back to higher education. So if you're in the vet sector, it's just important to consider that that may happen. But also, if you're in the higher education sector and you saw that a lot of deferrals are actually expecting that those deferrals will come back to higher ed, I think it's normal to understand that some students, after being in bed for 1 year, maybe they will just continue there. So this retransfer of sectors is something that we need to have in mind when we look into 2021. Now, when we look into the other sectors, I think it's very, very important just to acknowledge that the two main sectors that have been hit by COVID-19 are the school sectors and the ELICA sector. As you can see on your screen, it's about 20% less the number of student enrollments in comparison to last year. And if we see actually commencements, which is new starts, it sometimes gets to up to 30%. And it's very important that we focus on that in our recovery plan, because it's not only the right thing to do to look after a healthy sector, but also one of the strengths that we have in the international education sector here in Australia is that there are pathways for international students. And a lot of these students in the school sector will eventually move into higher education. So we also need to have a healthy school sector. And it's the same with the ELICAs. A lot of the students who come here and do English, they have a pathway to vet and to higher education. So we really need to look into how we can actually assist these two sectors as well in our recovery to 2021. Okay? Now, of course, you know, we can spend a lot of time looking into all this and looking into the data, like we could spend hours, but we have limited time. So this is just a quick snapshot. But I also need to remind everybody that this is the data that we have up to July. We still need to wait to see what happens in August and September, which in the case of some universities, they have some big intake, some universities in August and another one in September. And I unfortunately think that the drop in commencements is going to be even higher when we include those numbers. So we just need to keep in mind, and that's how it happens with COVID. Things move so quickly that you just need to keep tracking the data as it comes, just to start building the story and trying to react to how we are moving. Okay, so let's just wait and see August and September just to have the complete data set. But also I think it's important to remember that COVID also created a distortion in the data sets. When we look into international student enrollments, that does not mean necessarily that there is an effect in revenue in the same way. As you probably remember, as a way to react to the health emergency, international students were allowed for the first time not to have the full load, which means that they are probably just enrolled in a program, but they are taking probably 1 or 2 units only, which means that most likely the revenue, impact in revenue is a lot higher. So these data limitations are important just to be aware. And when you do your own institutional analysis, just please be aware that you need to consider other things, because unfortunately the trends and the data set have been disturbed also by COVID. All right, that's what the data in general is telling us. And as I said, we could actually spend quite a long time looking into that. But let's just move to the next part of the presentation. And before I actually move, I think it's also important that we need to acknowledge something that is important when we think about 2021. It seems that we're gonna have a tale of two stories with 2021. And the first half of 2021, we may still have some of these challenging conditions. We still may have some of the travel restrictions. You as professionals of marketing and recruitment probably will have limitations into go to country and do recruitment. We have a pipeline that will be affecting the first half of 2021. But it seems that we will be able just to see kind of a V-shaped kind of recovery that most likely will come in the second half of the year. I'm saying that because when you are doing forecasting and budgeting and thinking about your plans, we need to consider that, yeah, we're gonna have actually a two-speed in the way in which the year is gonna come in place for 2021. Now, moving away from the big data sets and talking about the data that we at Studymove we have been collecting, I think it's very useful to really look into how this piece of marketing have changed. And of course, I'm talking about, probably you're like, what piece this guy is talking about? Well, of course, I'm talking about what he brings together a marketing mix. Everybody in marketing probably accepts that there are 4 Ps. There is people who talk about 7. There is even talking about 9 Ps. But let's just focus for a minute in looking how these 4 Ps have changing. And of course, I'm talking about the fact that product, price, promotion, and place put together the marketing strategy for any organization. Of course, in our industry, we call them in a different way, and actually we'll translate them into an international education language, okay? Starting with the first P, which is product, which in our industry is called programs. I think that what we can expect in 2021 and maybe 2022 too, is that it will be likely to see, we're gonna likely to see a slow and probably not too significant, but definitely a change in the number of programs available for international students. We already have seen that in the last few weeks, a few universities are already announcing that some of the programs that don't have a lot of demand are gonna be basically taken out of the portfolio of programs available, not only for international, for domestic students. Because we also need to remember that the development of programs is not only an international kind of effect, it actually comes with changes that may exist in the domestic actually demand for programs. So we will see definitely some changes. And I think we also, because we're in a financial stress, we're gonna see that some programs, the composition of them may change with probably less selective. Now, this is an area that I don't think that if I'm a professional in marketing and recruitment, I should be too much worried about it, but it's something that you need to be aware. It's something that it may impact some of your international applicants. And I think it's important just to be aware and to kind of have an understanding of what could happen and what kind of students may be affected by this change. Now, moving along in this piece, let's move to one that I think is quite interesting, which is price, which in our world of international education, we call it basically fees. So I believe that fees are gonna play a very significant role in the next couple of years. And this is because as a result of COVID, we're also in a very complicated economic environment around the world. And I think that students, well, applicants and the parents of those applicants are gonna look into more detail into what's the fees that they're actually going to pay and what's the return of those fees. So it's very important for organizations to actually, and institutions in general, just to understand how their fees are actually aligned with the complete marketing mix. I'm not saying that because we have an a complicated situation, everybody needs to drop their fees. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to put more attention in where we are. If you are a high rank, high quality perceived university, well, of course, probably your fees should be on the higher end. But if you are not, you really need to put more attention in where you are in regards to fees. Okay? And I'm saying this because when we start collecting the fee data 5 years ago, actually now we're in our 6th year of collecting fees, we noticed that a lot of institutions were having just only what it was a state, city, or territory perspective. Basically, their pricing strategy was based on what it was happening in their own neighborhood. A good example of that is I remember having a conversation with somebody from a university in Victoria, and basically they said, look, I don't really need to look into fees in that detail because I know that here in Victoria, the highest fees are always University of Melbourne, followed by Monash, and then probably in the other side of the scale with lower fees will be probably the Australian Catholic University and Victoria Uni. So I had to be somewhere in the middle. And that was very much how they were actually deciding to put their fees. We know that now it has to be more of a more complex and more detailed analysis of fees. And this is because, as I said, international applicants, other parents are looking into this with more detail. And also we notice that they're actually looking into broader comparison. They don't only look into what kind of pricing is in a particular city, but they're actually looking into nationwide decision-making. And they look into the price and the fees across nations and sometimes even across different countries. This is because not only the effect of COVID, but I think the new generation is now making more complex decisions. But also, I think technology is really allowing international candidates just to collect data and to make comparison more effectively. Portals, like we have great portals, student portals like IDP Connect or student portals, they really are tools that allow students just to look into that. So it's important that when you're thinking about your pricing strategy, you need to consider that it has to be on a broader horizon, that's for sure. Now, we also know that there is, and this is more for the university sector, that there is a close relationship with rankings. We have seen this in the last 3 years, and I think that will remain in 2021, especially because the students are gonna look for things to benchmark and elements who are very important and reference points that really allow them just to make the decision. And it's important to remember that rankings are still valid and they will still valid in 2021. So have that in mind when you're actually thinking about your pricing strategies. And just as a recommendation, because we noticed that some institutions don't do this, it's important that you review your fees more frequently. We noticed that some institutions actually reviews and set their fees 2 or 3 years in advance. And then when the market change, it's harder for them just to actually change the condition and change their fees. And I think as a result of COVID, we now understand that it has to be more of an annual basis kind of analysis, the one that we need to do. Okay. Now, I just want to share with you where we at in terms of fees here in Australia, and this is only for the university sector, but it really gives you an indication of where we at if you haven't seen this data before. Every single blue dot that you see on the chart represents the average annual fee for undergraduate programs in Australia. As you can see, we have universities that start from 25,000 that go all the way above 45,000. But just as a reference point, I think it's important to know that where we at the moment, this is for undergraduate, is about $34,000, the average international fee. Okay, this is just as a reference for everybody in the session. Now, the big question with pricing is what's going to happen in 2021, and it's still hard really just to pinpoint what's going to happen. But what we know is that in average, and this is the data that I want to share with you, across Australian universities, this is how universities have been increasing their fees on average. As you can see, it's about the 6 and the 5% mark. But of course, this is actually different across every single university. And every year we actually have seen that there is a wide range of increases across the sector. But if you can see pretty much from in the chart from the number 8, which is 3.2%, to nearly probably the number 32, is about between 3 and 6% what we have seen. The majority of universities play around increases in fees around those areas. Some universities every year they need to make bigger adjustments, but if you want to have a reference, this is something that you can actually consider. So we're just going to try to give you another reference point when you are thinking about your strategies for 2021. Now, from there, I think we can actually think about a few scenarios. And some universities are already introducing their 2021 fees to the public domain. And we have seen that more or less people are actually move around the following scenarios. I think the majority of the universities are actually going to look into a small increase, being more conservative, and probably have an increase between 3 and 4%. Now, I also think that it will be some universities, and this has changed actually quite a bit in the conversations that we are having. Before the Victoria second wave, I think that it was a lot more of an optimism in the way in which things were reacting. But still, there are some universities that they think that for February, they're going to see a bump in international applicants, which is going to allow them probably just to have a higher increase in fees. And with that, probably recover some of the financial costs that COVID created in 2020. I think that for this matter, I think every education provider will have their own data set and will look into how applications are tracking for 2021 and will make decisions based on this. But I think these are the scenarios that we're actually facing for 2021. Now, we cannot talk about fees without talking scholarships, especially here in Australia. We have seen, this is since 2018, a significant increase in scholarships. And I'm not talking only about merit award scholarships, I'm talking about also fee waivers, or you can call it discounts. We have seen an increase into these scholarships since 2018. Just to let you know, from the data that we collect in 2018, we saw that there were 517 scholarship programs available for international students in Australia. Then the number went to 619, which was a significant increase. And I expect that for next year, we're actually gonna see even probably a higher increase into that. What I think is important about the scholarships is that this has been a very reactive strategy across the sector. This has been pretty much a conversation because you look around and see that other institutions have a scholarship, so I basically need to have a scholarship. I think that if we really wanna be more strategic about this is time where institutions, they really need to look into what really works and what doesn't work in terms of a scholarship and not just be reactive, because this is really not gonna help the sector. So hopefully in the next couple of months, we're gonna probably see a more strategic view into what actually helps in conversion and what doesn't know. But what we're expecting for 2021 is that it will be an increase even more on the use of scholarships, just to try and just to engage with the market using that tool. Okay. All right, now we talk about product, we talk about price, and let's talk about probably the P, which more visibly has been affecting the things that you do on a daily basis as a marketing and recruiter experts in the industry, which is promotion. When travel restrictions came, of course, we all had to move into the digital world and trying to engage with candidates using digital channels. Unfortunately, it seems that at this stage, there is not a lot of data, and we're still learning about the effectiveness of some of these digital strategies. And because there is no data, when I think there is no data, you need to look for ways to create your data and have a better understanding on that. And for that reason, we actually gonna put together an online survey with a couple of questions. We are very lucky to have 150 experts in international education today connected. So this is a great opportunity to look and to learn what are your views about these virtual channels. In particular, I will think it's gonna be valuable if we look into virtual fairs, which I know that a lot of you have invested a significant amount into this. So let me just stop sharing and then share my Mentimeter. So if you, I think that the best way to do it to this is in your phone. If in your phone you go to menti.com, but you can do it also in your computer, and I think they're gonna put it on the chat, and use the code 9261541, you're gonna be able just to join the session, okay? Right, so I'm just gonna open it now, and I'm just gonna share with you some of the questions that we had for virtual fairs. The first one that I have in regards to virtual fair, I think it's going to be very useful if we start answering this question, is how effective in your experience in 2020 have been virtual fairs in three main areas. The first one is how effective has been to create a new student inquiries, and I start to see some of the answers already, which is in terms of creating leads, but also how effective they have been to create applications, which I think that's what matters at the end. And finally, something that I know that the people who have been creating virtual fairs have put a lot of effort, and it has been a big transformation, which is the engagement with potential clients. So if you can help me join in, oh, we have already 21, 23, 28, and so it's looking good. Okay. Okay, we're just waiting for a few more. Okay, and I think that this chart, and we will share these results with all of you, in a way I think shows what we hear from different education providers. It seems that virtual fairs have been, they are not on the side of disagreement, but they are not on the side of a strong agreement. They have been okay to create leads, not as effective to create applications, but definitely an engagement to engage with potential clients. So it seems that it has been, for what you are telling me, the strength of virtual fairs. It has been a good way just to create potential clients, but not necessarily applicants. And to be honest, I think that this actually shows what is an education fair, regardless if it's virtual or not. You tell me, but probably we can have a conversation about that later. But you know, a virtual fair or an or a face-to-face fair, you don't expect that every single people that you talk to it will create an application, but it's interesting just to have a view into that. There's still a few more joining it, so we have 68. So I'm just gonna give it a few more seconds and then we'll move. So I think that, I don't think it's gonna change significantly. 71, okay, excellent. Thank you so much for your answers. Now let me just move to the second one, and sorry if I had to move, but we have a limited time, okay? The second question, I think is gonna be interesting for you all to follow, which is about the future investment in virtual fairs. We just wanna see the traction that exists. Are we gonna move into a hybrid kind of a strategy, or what's gonna happen? So the question is, how much your institution will invest in virtual fairs in 2021? And the range is, if you go 10, well, we'll invest a lot more. And then the other side is, we'll invest a lot less. And for what I can see, still, I'm gonna wait for a second. For what I can see is that, and I love that the fact that it's showing pretty much also the majority of responses. Yeah, the vast majority of responses are showing that pretty much the same. So we're not gonna forget about virtual fairs. We're actually gonna consider them for 2021, which is a very interesting result. And it's just a small group that probably is saying no, but overall, I think we can agree. You think that, Tanvir? If you can nod to me, I think that it shows that overall about the same investments across the sector, which is a very interesting result. And I think it will give you some reassurance of what you are doing or considering for next year. Okay, so let me move to the next one. We got 70 responses in that, which is great, pretty significant. Okay, now the last one is just kind of a trial, and I just wonder if you can help me. And in one word, please describe your experience with virtual fairs. I'm not gonna put any suggestions. I just wanna hear, what do you think? Okay. Okay, so we're starting to get a few things, okay? Um, and once again, thank you so much for your engagement, because this is an area where we really need to learn how we're gonna move forward, because it's such an important part of our strategies. And I think that it's interesting just to see what is going on, okay? All right, looking into this, okay? I'm just gonna wait for a second. Okay. Right. It seems that boring and challenging have been like the preferred options to describe a virtual fair. Mixed, underwhelming, like mixed feelings, disappointing, shocking, tedious, unpredictable, underwhelming. Now, if you see what I'm seeing, I think basically we all agree that it's such a new thing that we still need to learn more about it. I think that it's interesting that you are telling me that you will invest probably the same in virtual fairs in next year, but you still feel that we haven't really found the right way of doing it, because I don't see any like exciting, effective. There's effective there, different, tiring. Okay, so this is interesting also, because I think from your position to hear that it hasn't really worked probably as you were expecting. That's what I can see from this. But this is obviously just an opportunity just to get your sentiment toward virtual fairs. Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much for everybody who participate in the survey. I think it's quite interesting, and we will actually share all these with you, okay? So I'm just gonna go back to the presentation and talk about another very important part of our promotion strategy that has been affected significantly. And this is talking about education agents. We know that COVID actually created a really big effect in education agents. Some education agents are actually really struggling, and I think we need to acknowledge and talk about that. So I think that unfortunately, we're gonna see probably in 2021 redistribution of the agent network. I think that unfortunately some agents will have to close some agent offices. Some of them may be actually gonna have to close completely, because the economic impact has been pretty severe, and it's a shame that actually it's going to happen like that. But it might be the case that it will be the search of other education agents, people looking for opportunities. So actually, I think we're going to see definitely changes happening in the agent network. I also think, and I think we are hearing a little bit of that, and I don't have the data, but I think that universities are going to be more open to having a different commission schemes, different partnership models. I think that something that COVID created is the opportunity to look outside of the square. And one of the things that we used to do before COVID, it was like all education agents pretty much were part of the same model. And I think that now institutions are going to think about different ways in which they can engage more effectively with agents and probably fit their model to the demands for each particular market. So let's see what happened there. Now, what I want to show you is some of the data that we collect. We collect this via a big database that basically shows the number of education agents who are working with Australian universities by country and by city. It's a big data set that includes more than 38,000 different fields. And this has been very useful just for us, just to identify where are these education agents, and for universities in particular, for education providers can actually do the same thing. Look to where they are, what's the location, because especially we need to look into this not only by country, but by city. And I'm saying this because unfortunately, due to travel restrictions, this development of an agent network or the way in which you are engaging with agents has changed significantly. I think previously the engagement with agents was done more on a face-to-face basis, visiting agent offices, and that's not possible. Probably you are visiting now their living room because you are doing things on Zoom, but this is actually creating limitations in the way in which you actually engage in with agents. And what this data set is also allowing us is just probably to understand also and create some metrics that I think are going to be useful in the way in which you could actually move forward in how you're actually engaging with your agents around the world. What we have done is that basically we identified how many universities are working with agencies by city and by country. And as an example, this is a random example, it's not real data, but let's just think about that there are 12 agencies in Bangladesh and Western Sydney University works with 6 of them. So this means that 50%, they are basically working with 50% of the agents. Now, this probably you will think, well, what's the point of knowing that? Well, I think it's relevant because if you need to take a decision on probably working with more agents or less agents in a particular country or city, it's going to be very useful just to see how that benchmark against the sector. And this is some of the data that I think is going to be interesting for you. This is looking at all the Australian universities and the average across everybody in the percentage of from the total number of agents in average with how many you're actually working as an average. So as you can see in places like Malaysia and India and China, on average, Australian universities are working only with 17 to 19% of the agencies available in that particular country. Now the point is that we just want to provide you with a metric that could be useful, especially now that you don't have the opportunity to travel to the country, you don't know what's happening. I think to make some decisions, this is gonna be useful just to understand more or less how many actually, what's the percentage that exists in average. So if, for instance, you're actually working with 50% of the agents in Malaysia, well, you know that actually you are working with more than the average. And the idea behind this is just to provide some data that will help you just when you have conversations across this particular topic in your particular institution. So you will get the slide with all these charts and you will gonna be able just to see it with more detail. Of course, it is important to see this not only by countries, but by cities. And you can see that some cities that are very important, Australian universities are working more actively with a percentage of agents in that particular city. Like Mumbai and New Delhi is about 30%, but some others like in the Philippines, in Manila, is about 11%. So I think it's just useful just to have that as a benchmark. All right. Let's move to the final P, which probably is the most important, not the most important, the one that I think we're gonna look into more in the next couple of years, which is the P of place, which in our marketing mix, it's all about the delivery of the programs, how we deliver it to our international students. And this is when we, as you know, we had a lot of conversations talking about how programs will move to online, how programs could move to articulation or transnational opportunities. So just briefly, we actually look into this, and it's just quite interesting just to see, and this is actually a snapshot that it was taken in June, so it's quite fresh, that from close to 6,000 university programs offered on campus, only 800 are actually offered online. And I'm talking about complete online degrees, not only units, but complete degrees. So there is still a lot of room actually for institutions who want to go into this particular area of online. There is a lot of programs that you have available on campus that, you know, I'm not expecting that every single one will actually be transferred online, but there are some opportunities there if your institution are thinking about that. Now, probably this data that I'm showing is quite more interesting. From these 800 degrees offered online, only 22% are for society and culture, followed by 21% of management and commerce, and 18% health and 13% education. The figure that I think is quite interesting for me is information technology. We know that about, I think it's 25% of student commencements are in that area, and there are very, very limited number of online degrees for that particular area. Now, I know that online degree probably deserves a whole week of talking about it, but I just want to give you some additional data that I think is relevant when you're actually tuning into that particular area. And I don't expect that every single education provider will go there, but I think that that's one that we're actually, some education providers will start to consider. Now, finally, talking about articulation and transnational, and this one has been an interesting project. We actually managed to collect information of every single articulation agreement and RPL available in Australia. And it was very, very useful just to take this data and to understand what is already happening in the area of articulation. I think that a lot of institutions are going to look into this with more detail. Now, it has been quite interesting to see, and what we hear, and if you're in this area, you know this, the seeding process, the creation of an articulation agreement, it takes time, it's very organic, it's based on probably conversation that happen at faculty level. Sometimes it doesn't have this marketing approach, and it requires a more strategic and a more integrated collaboration across institutions. What we have also been using this data set is especially to do that, to identify some of the best practices that already exist here in Australia, and using the data just to identify what articulation agreements are available that might help you just to expand your own articulation agreements, because I really think that this is something that institutions are going to look in more detail in 2021. Now, just quickly, from the data that we collect, these are the articulation agreements that we identify by country. And as you can see, a lot of these agreements are in places where are traditional markets for Australia, which is China, Singapore, and Malaysia. Some, like Canada, are more like for diversity markets. So a few institutions are already thinking about using an articulation strategy to diversify their portfolio. And I think that's probably a very interesting approach when you are looking for a diversity strategy, which I know a lot of education providers are thinking about that. Okay? Interesting, for instance, to see that in the top 10, you don't see Vietnam, you don't see Nepal. Some of the big source markets for Australia are not here. And also interesting, and I'm just about to finish, interesting to see that the vast majority of these articulation agreements that we have are at undergraduate level. I think that historically that's where articulations were happening, but only less than like 5% are in the postgraduate study levels. This is quite interesting because we know that 50% of student enrollments are in postgrad. So I think that there are opportunities to explore more of an articulation agreement or even transnational opportunities in that particular area. All right. Just as final remarks and just to complete the presentation, I just wanna hope that going through all this, and of course we need more time to go into detail, but really helps just to understand some of the things that have changed in our marketing and recruitment strategy. But I also think that in 2021, we're gonna see a lot of innovation happening, and hopefully that innovation will actually be based on the strengths that your institution will have. And as probably you can see through the presentation, I think that we're gonna move to 2021 with an idea of a strategic alignment. I think that it's gonna be so important that institutions, they stop working on silos, they stop working separately. And it's not gonna work if you have an area doing partnerships in one side of the campus and another one doing student recruitment. I think that integrated approach is a really, really important element of your strategy for 2021. But I also have to say that it's very important, and I'm hoping that in the last months of 2020, we take the time just institutionally to reconsider the vision that we're gonna have. For many years, a lot of the strategies in terms of marketing and recruitment that we received, it was get me as many students and get me as you can do them. That's not a strategy. We really need to start moving into 2021 with some proper vision and on where the institution wants to go. And in order to do that, I think that the marketing and recruitment team could actually do a much better job instead of just trying to stumble into 2021. So hopefully we're gonna see some time where institutions are gonna reflect on that. And in that way, we can actually move in a more effective way to 2021. So thank you so much for the presentation. I hope it was not a lot, but anyhow, I think we covered quite a bit during these couple of minutes, and I'm just passing it back to Tanvir. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you for your wealth of experience and you put up in the last 40 minutes or so. So excellent. Thank you again. We do have some interesting questions and few comments came up. Kerry, I can't avoid to read out few of the comments, especially when few people mentioned that pricing analysis needs to be global. A few people mentioned that while hearing your presentation, that interesting to compare the sentiment of staff versus prospective students who attend the virtual fairs. Some comments came up as split of study abroad and exchange agents from agents that support all the degrees. So it might be an interesting part when the agency numbers. So now quickly jumping into the few quick questions. I don't think we will manage to finish all the questions, but dear viewers, we know who you are, so we will get back to your questions via email within the next few days. But I have a few minutes to go through a few questions with Kerry now. So Kerry, our one quick questions here is, vet sector is increasing. Can you share that what are the subject areas in the vet is increasing in this time?
I don't have the data by field of study, but what we notice, and that's the data coming from the Department of Education, is that is a large number of students from India, the ones who did that transferred from higher education to vet. And we also noticed that that increase in commencements and enrollments from vet comes from that particular. Now, historically, like I think that following that is students from India, we will think that it will be probably the same kind of field of study, like things like management of commerce, information technology, and engineer. But yeah, I'll be more than happy to look into that and send you the response soon to whoever asked the question.
Sure. And the next one is, Kerry, you have mentioned that certainly there is a trend. You have said that up to July, of course, that from the higher education, there's a trend to going to the vet. But at the same time, we know that there is a Australian visa regime that tried to stop when it's going to the higher level to the lower level AQF degrees. So is that now a little bit softened, or how that is happening?
Yeah, well, I think that the transfer, and unfortunately the data don't provide the complete data set, but we have been looking at data. You actually can find it in internationaleducation.gov.au. There is a section about pathways. And we saw that the big shift in the distribution happened early in the year. It was March and April. From there, kind of like, it hasn't really changed, it just remained the same. So it seems that it was probably at the start before we had this conversation about changes on the student visas when the students actually did that shift. Okay? So, but let's see what happens. That's exactly a good point. Let's see what happens, because if it's gonna be a transfer back and forth, that's gonna have an impact in 2021 for sure.
Excellent. And the next question, I think it's a bit of clarification. So if you can just clarify that the data you have shown, that included the students who are in overseas as well?
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And the same person's, another clarification been shout that the data was based on not the visa number, I believe. That's a real enrollment.
Yeah. That's right, it's real enrollment. And one of the problems that we have looking at 2021 is that the student visa data that is actually provided by the immigration department, that's unfortunately completely broken, because we know that a lot of students actually are enrolled, but they are overseas, and they haven't even applied for a visa because there was no need for a visa. Yep. Then it was the change on the visas, and some of them, it seems that they are applying. So that's really, really hard, because when we are looking for leading indicators to see what's happening for 2021, the student visa data, that's what we used to do. But unfortunately, it's really hard to follow. So yeah, we're talking about actual enrollments.
Yes, so certainly it's a bit of broken data with the degree and then the non-award degrees. Okay, the next question, quite interesting one. What's your advice, Kerry, if the universities who refuse to review or change their fees?
Who refuse to review and change it?
With the considering there's all this pandemic, and you have shown that there are lots of universities are on hold pattern for the 2021 fees. So I think the question is kind of, is it something like, do you have the data, like maybe it's now month of October. So I'm sure we do have the data in 2021, what the other, all the universities have put up their fees in 2021.
Yeah, well, I will say that it will be very unfortunate if universities don't have a clear, like a very detailed look on how they're gonna set their fees for next year, because that means that we're thinking that nothing has changed, and things have changed significantly in the market and in the preference of international students. So I think it's very important that institutions look at their strengths and look where they actually can recover some of the financial loss, and where can actually they engage with this group of students more effectively. Now, in regards to 2021, believe it or not every single university has published their 2021 fees. I think that a lot of them, I think that a lot of them are already trying to figure out how they're gonna do that. And I also understand that the process of setting fees, especially for university, it comes with so many different parties. It's a rigorous actually process. It's not something that you have, a shop that you just change your prices. It actually takes time. But yeah, so at this stage, not every single one. It's some of them who actually provide 2021 fees.
Okay, so we need to wait for a few more months, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, next one is there further cross data on the quality or output of the overseas education agencies that Australian higher education do work with?
Yeah, I don't have any data in regards to that. What we know is that about 71% of the students come from agents, which shows how important are education agents in the way in which we engage with international applicants. And for that reason, I think it's going to be a very important thing of our strategy for 2021 to see, after the big disruption that COVID created in education agents, how we're going to re-engage with them. And as I said, one of the things that we are listening, not from everybody, just a few, is reconsider what's the model where we actually gonna follow. Thinking about other things like articulation agreements, for instance, like education agents have a great amount of knowledge about how countries actually develop. So why don't we engage with agents probably just to develop an articulation agreement on behalf of a university? That's a crazy idea, but it's 2020. It may actually work in 2021. Also, the way in which we engage in terms of commissions as well. So I think we need to really, considering that it's such a vital part of the marketing and recruitment strategy, we just need to review what else we can do to support the education agent network. And on that note, I have to say that a lot of the data that we present is a general view of what we have seen is changing. It may not resonate with every single institution. And actually, what we want to create from this is just put things on the table that will help us to have a discussion, because the level of uncertainty that we have been dealing with, it has been tremendous. And I think that we're just trying to put some things that will help just to have a more meaningful discussion within your institution.
Thank you, Kerry, and thank you everyone for all the questions. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. The remaining questions we do have noted, and we will pass it to Kerry, and we'll get back to you as well with your answers. So we hope that you have got a lot out of today, that you feel empowered by the data to embark the road to recovery at your own institution. Please give your feedback on today's webinar via the quick poll that is now on your screen. If you'd like to make any additional comments, you can do so in Q&A window. And before we head off, it's time to farewell our Deputy Convener of the Marketing and Recruitment Network, Emma Donohoe. I would like to request Emma and our convener, Michelle, to turn on their cameras. Michelle, would you mind just saying the farewell notes for our Emma?
Sure, thanks Tanvir. Before I begin, I'd just like to express my many thanks to Kerry for his very informative session today. I'd also like to acknowledge my Deputy Convener Tanvir and the IEAA team for making this happen, so thanks very much. So today it is with mixed emotions that we do say goodbye to Emma in her capacity as Deputy Convener of this network. Emma has brought such enthusiasm, creativity, and a sound knowledge of digital marketing to this team. Emma's been really instrumental in her work supporting both our 2019 forum, Are You Ready for the Next Evolution, and our 2020 forum, which we took online, so Drivers of Virtual Change. Emma's also supported our networking functions and our AIEC network conversation events, including the much talked about joining forces, integrating the sales and marketing functions. But unfortunately, there does come a time when we do need to reevaluate our external commitments and reassess our personal priorities. And to that end, I'm pleased that Emma will be committing to completing her postgraduate studies in the near future.
Yes.
And we will be welcoming George Hernandez as the new network convener as I step down to a supportive role of deputy convener. So on behalf of the network, I'd like to once again thank you, Emma, for your time and commitment to this team. And I wish you all the very best in your next endeavour. So I'll pass it over to you to say a few words.
Oh gosh. Thank you so much to Michelle, our convener, Tanvira, deputy convener. It's been an absolute joy to work with you and get to know you this year, even though we haven't gotten to meet face to face just yet, thanks to COVID, in the way that we normally would. And a massive thank you to Kerry for sharing his knowledge again. He's a great supporter of our network, and it was a pleasure to meet you face to face in 2019 in Sydney, back when things were a little more normal, when you joined us for our forum then. And to the IEAA team as well for all of their support, especially this year in helping us, pivot so quickly to doing our forum in a completely new way for us. And it was really just such an awesome experience, as has my whole term with IEAA been such an awesome experience. It's very sad to be ending my term, but yes, I do need to finish my masters and stop dragging that on. I've been mastering in procrastination more than anything with my postgraduate studies, but yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been an absolute honour.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Emma and Michelle. Thank you for joining in as well. So thank you for participation, which inspires us to organize such sessions time to time. We are looking forward to seeing you at our future events. Enjoy your rest of the afternoon. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.